Freddie, why should the neighboring states pay for what Israel and the United States did in Gaza?
Because as a realist, you should accept that it's in their regional interest.
It's not in their regional interest at all.
Why not?
The United States and Israel destroyed Gaza. The Israelis were executing a genocide. I mean, Trump sits there with Netanyahu and they talk about Gaza now being unlivable, and they talk about all the destruction in Gaza and the fact that the Palestinians cannot live there. It has been so thoroughly wrecked. And then the question is, who wrecked Gaza? Who did this? And the answer is the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu sitting right next to Trump, and Netanyahu did it in cahoots with Joe Biden and the West, and especially the United States. We should pay for rebuilding Gaza. The Israelis should pay for rebuilding Gaza. It's the Israelis and the Americans who destroyed Gaza, not the Egyptians or the Jordanians. You want to remember that the Israelis have just spent the past 16 months executing what I call a genocide in Gaza. They have murdered huge numbers of Palestinians. By almost all accounts, they've made the place unlivable. It's really quite remarkable when you see the destruction that they have wrought in Gaza. And nevertheless, the Palestinians are still there, and Hamas, by Israeli accounts and by Tony Blinken's account, is alive and well. So what are we going to do now to fix the problem? Well, what's the viable solution that Trump has? What does this thinking outside of the box add up to? There's no question he's thinking outside of the box, but is what he is thinking logical? Is it viable? Is it morally correct? I don't think it's any of those things. I, as an American, certainly don't want to be associated with a policy that calls for ethnically cleansing Gaza at the end of a rifle barrel. Furthermore, I don't think you can do it. The Israelis were unable to do it. I don't think we're going to be able to do it. Trump has made it clear we're not going to go in there and do it. So who's going to do it? The Israelis? Well, they've already tried. What do you think they've been doing for the past 15 months?
Can I try and put a small point in Trump's defense? When you say he's proposing ethnically cleansing Palestinians, has he actually done that?
Has he done that?
Yeah.
No, and he's not going to be able to do it. That's my point.
No, but has he proposed that?
Yes, he's talked about pushing the Palestinians, all of the Palestinians. By my count, there were, before this conflict started on October 7th, there were about 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. And he's talking about clearing them all out. And that would have to be done at the end of a rifle barrel. Those people are not going to leave. He has not said that he was going to push them out at the end of a rifle barrel, but that is implicit in what he says. But he's committed to getting rid of those people, and he's now said that they're not welcome back. In the beginning, when he first raised this idea, he talked about pushing them out maybe temporarily. But now that's been taken off the table, and the idea is that they're going to be pushed out permanently, and he's going to find new homes for them in places like Jordan and Egypt. Like, people say, if the hostages don't come back on Saturday, these are the Israeli hostages who are due to be released this Saturday. If they don't come back, Netanyahu is going to restart the war. And I say to myself, okay, what does that mean? The war was not going very well, which is why the Israelis agreed to the ceasefire. They didn't agree to the ceasefire because Trump put great pressure on them. They agreed to the ceasefire in large part because the IDF, the Israeli military, put great pressure on Netanyahu to effect a ceasefire because the IDF understood it could not defeat Hamas, number one, and number two, the Israeli army was coming apart at the seams. It was suffering great casualties in Gaza, and furthermore, that this is an army that's configured for fighting short wars, not long wars. It was not configured to fight a war of attrition over a long period of time in Gaza. So it was in deep trouble. So the Israelis agreed to a ceasefire. And now we're talking about putting an end to that ceasefire. Okay, what's the magic formula that the Israelis have now come up with that's going to allow them to deal with the Hamas problem that they couldn't deal with for the first 16 months of the war? I just don't understand. So, Trump is thinking outside the box, but sometimes thinking outside the box makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I don't think it makes sense.
The Israelis have always wanted a greater Israel. Isn't that a pretty controversial thing to say, and perhaps unfair, given that there may be politicians in Israel today who wanted greater Israel and have done for a long time, but Israel as a state has not always acted as though it has wanted a greater Israel. It has sought accommodation with the Palestinians, and it has been rebuffed.
No, I don't believe that. I believe these are myths that we tell ourselves in the West so that we can continue to support Israel down the line. I think the original Zionists, the people who were interested in creating a Jewish state, which of course happened in May of 1948, understood full well that they could not take all the territory at once, simply because there were so many Palestinians in the area and not nearly as many Jews, and it would have to be done incrementally. But the idea that the Israelis were interested in a meaningful two-state solution, and it was the Palestinians who rejected those wholly generous offers by the Israelis, is a tall tale. And I know we tell it in the West, and when I make the argument that I'm making, people think that, I'm an anti-Semite or I'm hostile to Israel and so forth and so on. But there's a whole literature written by Israelis that makes it clear that the Israelis were never interested in creating a Palestinian state, and they wanted all of Israel. They just understood that they'd have to do it gradually. They wouldn't be able to take all that territory all at once.
Is that what Trump was trying to do, was pressure the neighboring Arab states to come up with viable solutions of their own, possibly rebuilding Gaza themselves, paying for it, and possibly trying to take care, look after some of the Palestinian people who have been displaced. Jordan seems to be rebuffing Trump a bit more forcefully at the moment, whereas Egypt has suggested that it would like to come up with a reconstruction plan for Gaza. So perhaps this is bluster from Trump that is working, that's achieving leverage over those Arab states.
I don't believe that at all. It's actually united the Arab states in the region. There's universal agreement among the Arab states and universal agreement in the Arab and Islamic world that this is morally reprehensible, that this is the Palestinians' land, that the United States and Israel have absolutely no right to push them out. And in no way are they going to accommodate the United States and Israel. We're isolated on this one. I'm sure the Europeans are with us on this for the most part. But outside of the Europeans, there's no support for what the United States wants to do in this case. The last thing Jordan wants is to create a huge enclave for more Palestinians inside its borders, and Egypt is thinking the same way. Look, the fact is the United States is remarkably powerful, and it has tremendous leverage over Egypt and Jordan, because in the past we worked out a deal with Egypt and Jordan where we would give them huge amounts of financial aid if they played nice with Israel. We bought off for Israel. We did this for Israel. We bought off Jordan and Egypt. Again, there's a huge literature on this. This is not something I'm making up. But once we do that, not only do we guarantee at the time that Egypt and Jordan will play nice with Israel, but it gives us huge leverage over time. And Trump fully understands that. And he's basically telling the Jordanians and the Egyptians, we have huge economic leverage over you, and we're going to use that leverage to force you. We're going to coerce you into accepting the Palestinians. And the question you have to ask yourself is whether or not the Jordanians and the Egyptians will cave. And the Jordanians made it clear yesterday The Jordanian president made it clear in a tweet after his meeting with Trump that that's not going to happen. And Sisi, General Sisi, the Egyptian leader, canceled his trip to Washington because he doesn't want to be humiliated by Trump, and he wants to make it clear that he's not going to go along either. So you have a situation here, Freddie. The Palestinians are not going to leave. The Egyptians are not going to take them. The Jordanians are not going to take them. And then you have to ask yourself a simple question. Where does that leave us? Trump played an important role in fashioning the ceasefire that took place on January 19th. This is the Gaza ceasefire that took place on January 19th, which, of course, is the day before he moved into the White House. He sent his mediator, his Middle East mediator, Steve Witkoff, to the Middle East to basically tell Netanyahu, let's get a ceasefire. So it looked like Trump was off to a good start, right? We got a ceasefire in Gaza. And most people, not Netanyahu and company, but most people thought that was all for the good. But since he moved into the White House on January 20th, he's cut in the other direction. And if anything, he's done all he can to undermine the ceasefire agreement. And in my opinion, that doesn't make sense from his point of view, because a ceasefire and trying to work out some sort of meaningful modus vivendi with Israel and the Palestinians is a much smarter thing to do than try to turn Gaza into the Riviera in the Middle East. And as you know, Trump is somebody who says one thing 1 minute and then says the exact opposite a minute later. He's not getting a lot of support in the Arab world, and that Hamas is not going to give up easily in Gaza, and he's going to have to force them out, the Palestinians, if he wants to put this grand plan of his into operation.
And that just an hour before Trump's press office released a statement about the plan to take over Gaza, they released the agreement that Netanyahu and Trump seem to have reached on applying maximum pressure on Iran, on effectively pushing the Iranian regime as hard as they can.
No, I disagree with that. In fact, Haaretz had a headline story yesterday that made the point that what happened in Netanyahu's visit to the United States with regard to the Iranian issue was terrible news for Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not interested in maximum pressure. We've tried maximum pressure before. You want to remember that President Trump, in his first term, walked away from the nuclear arms agreement that the West and the Russians and the Chinese had fashioned with Iran. This is the famous JCPOA. That was the nuclear agreement. In 2018, Trump walked away from that, and Trump said that we're going to instead pursue a policy of maximum pressure to force Iran to agree to a better deal. Well, that failed. And what he's doing now is he is telling the Israelis, he's telling Netanyahu something he doesn't want to hear, which is that the United States is not planning on using military force to attack Iran. That's what Netanyahu wants. He wants the United States and Israel operating as a tag team to go in and blast the nuclear facilities in Iran. Trump has made it clear he has no interest in doing that, and instead he's going back to maximum pressure. The Israelis, of course, had to agree in public with Trump's policy position, but behind closed doors, they're adamantly opposed to it, which is why Haaretz had this headline yesterday saying that Netanyahu's position on Iran was undermined during his visit to Washington. And with regard to Saudi Arabia, if you read what the Saudis are now saying about Trump's plan to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, it's quite clear that we're further than ever from having an Abraham Accord with Saudi Arabia. Now, in the West, people like to talk about the fact that an Abraham Accord with Saudi Arabia is just around the corner. I would argue that if you look carefully at the evidence, that's not true at all. But even if you get an Abraham Accord with Saudi Arabia, what's the big deal? Is that going to help with all these different problems in places like Gaza, the West Bank, Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran? I think the answer is no.
Well, you said earlier that words matter. I would have thought accords matter, and diplomatic relations between countries being good matters because it's better than being bad.
The question, Freddie, is how much does it matter? And the answer is it doesn't matter very much at all. It matters for Saudi Arabia and Israel, but Saudi Arabia is not the big problem in the Middle East. We don't talk about the Saudi versus Israel conflict, right? Or the Sudan versus Israel conflict. We talk about places like Gaza, the West Bank, the Palestinians, Hezbollah, Iran, Syria. And these accords have little to do with those conflicts.
For viewers who have not read your work on the Israel lobby, what exactly is the Israel lobby?
Well, it's a group of individuals and organizations in the United States that are profoundly committed to making sure that the United States supports Israel unconditionally. It's very important to understand that the United States has a relationship with Israel that has no parallel in recorded history. The United States and Israel, despite the fact they sometimes have different interests, this is not to deny that they sometimes have the same interest, but they often have different interests. And in those cases, the lobby works overtime to make sure that the United States supports Israel unconditionally. And that's what the special relationship is all about. And the lobby is, I believe, the most powerful lobby or interest group in the history of the United States. And it wields enormous influence. And if any president pursues a policy in the Middle East that the Israelis adamantly oppose, you can rest assured that the lobby will go to work on Israel's behalf and push that American leader to support Israel. So on the Iran issue, Bill Clinton, when he was president, he started to play nice with the Israelis. And the lobby quickly moved in and told him the basic facts of life, which is he's not allowed to play nice with the Iranians because the Israeli government considers that unacceptable. I laid this out, Steve Walton and I laid this out in our chapter on Iran in the book on the Israel lobby. Question is, what does American diplomacy look like? How is America using all that power that it has to fashion or to influence events around the world that are in the American national interest?